So welcome to our weekly Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion podcast. My name is Pam Noble, a managing partner at the Christopher Group and the head of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Engagement practice. One of the primary reasons we conduct these podcasts is to educate others on the many facets of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am honored to welcome Dorcas Lind. Dorcas is the president and founder of the Diversity Health Communications, where she has worked with such clients as Novartis, Pfizer, Verizon, and Montefiore Medical Center, where she built and formalized the diversity and inclusion function by developing external and internal strategies and implementing programs for companies across multiple sectors, including media and advertising, healthcare and pharma, and nonprofit sectors. She has a solid track record of building dynamic, integrated diversity and inclusion strategic marketing and communication campaigns that enable stakeholders across multiple channels build, reinforce, or even repair corporate and brand image to ensure reputation, growth, mind sharing, and penetrating new markets. Welcome, Dorcas.
Thank you so much.
So let's jump into it. What I would really like to spend today on is focusing on inclusion. And you and I have had many conversations on this. And how do you define inclusion, and what does it look like?
Well, inclusion looks very different in the world that we are living in at the moment. And I think it's important for us to help define how inclusion has been transformed by some of the external, larger societal issues. But in general, when we talk about inclusion, we're really talking about how we bring together human difference into organizations and into teams where they can bring their fullest, most authentic self, that they are heard, their voice is respected, and they have the power to contribute in a way that's meaningful to the larger purpose of the organization. And I think we need to be very mindful of the fact that some of the older approaches to inclusion really had to do with the concept of tolerance. And I try to avoid that nomenclature altogether because we do not get the best out of individuals and teams when our mindset is tolerance. What we want to do is really celebrate difference across all of the dimensions of difference so that we actually tap into the most powerful and effective contributions that people can make within organizations. And when you approach it that way, leadership, management, and boots on the ground staff and teams can really have an opportunity to thrive.
So, you know what? In the aftermath of COVID-19, many organizations are working remotely, and organizations are really grappling with inclusion while working remotely. How do you build inclusion in these dynamic and virtual environments?
Yeah, I think that's such a critical question that so many groups and organizations and teams are grappling with, and it's industry agnostic. I think the only place where, outside of essential first responders in this time period, it's the first time in history where across industries, the act of working, living, and being educated are all happening in one place. And so how individuals are coping with that and then trying to engage in being an effective and contributing employee is very challenging when we think about all of the pressures and dynamics of those three functions happening in the same environment. But I have seen that what's been most effective is that organizations are starting to realize that they have to center the employee in terms of how they think about inclusive behaviors in this remote and virtual environment. And that really has to do with the concept of managing with empathy, right, and putting people's needs in balance with what the organizational needs are and what the project needs are. And that's actually something that I think is going to be a powerful transition that we can bring back into the workplace when that day comes, because eventually it will. But I think, with remote platforms, there's less visibility on those very unstructured opportunities for networking, much less informal interactions and discussions and decision-making that can happen when you're not in a physical environment together as a team. So managers are really looking to be creative about how you generate that kind of informality in a remote setting. You can't replicate the water cooler conversations, right? but there are opportunities to make space for people to meet virtually in ways that allow them to have those informal conversations that really are where so much of the creativity and the team building occur.
You spoke about these informal kind of networks or functions. And when you think about it, I'm hearing more and more about organizations that their employees are asking how they can become better allies given this unique period of social unrest and momentum for change. How would you coach an organization in supporting, these allies?
Allyship is critical, particularly in this environment where not only are we dealing with the physical distance in terms of how we can show our empathy and respect and support of others who are different from us, but also with the overlay of all of the social justice issues that are in the spotlight right now in terms of urgency and significance. And so I've been working with teams to do a couple of things. And the first is to really help them think about being deeper listeners and really applying through action what it is that they're hearing. So making room for people to share their voice and their experience without judgment and without defensiveness as well. So I think that the allyship piece is really reciprocal in that employees need to feel confident that they can actually share what some of their specific challenges and roadblocks might be. And those in allyship roles are able to hear it and actually make either personal or team level or organizational level commitments on how they want to take action on what they've heard. So for example, I've worked with teams where we've encouraged at the individual and team level folks to set their own inclusion commitments, whatever that means. So if someone has identified that they really want to be able to disrupt some of their personal biases in terms of how they interact with their colleagues, we've encouraged them to write those down at the beginning of the week or at the beginning of the month and actively go back to that list to see if they are holding themselves accountable to how they show up as an ally or how they show up as a manager in terms of what they've heard and what individuals on their teams need to feel that they are being supported within the organization.
The one last question that I'd like to speak on is, we've spoken in length about inclusion in a virtual environment and how to build allyship during this unique period. However, we really haven't spoken about recruiting. And there's a lot of companies that are still hiring across the country. How do we embed inclusion into a virtual hiring process?
This is particularly important, and I think really one of the silver linings of this very challenging time that we're in. We know from an HR perspective that this monolithic concept of cultural fit really has gotten in the way very often of organizations being able to hire outside of what is perceived as cultural fit. It's a real conundrum because people want to make sure that they feel comfortable and can like individuals who they bring onto their teams. But what we're seeing now is that has been disrupted because we're not in physical environments, and we have an opportunity to really look at skill sets in a way that might not necessarily have had to do in the past. And so I think recruiting rules where folk from the staffing and hiring perspective, they've had to be forced to disrupt that concept of finding people like me or finding people who will fit into the organization and looking more at skill set and an opportunity to shift the focus on people who can solve this business problem and who can perform this business role in a way that really be transformative. And so being able to go outside of geography can disrupt some of those traditional stereotypes of folks saying, I can't find enough color, I can't find women with the financial acumen to be in these leadership roles. I haven't been able to tap into people who are differently abled who might be able to join my team. All of those barriers are now, not significant in terms of where people are located and how the best talent can be found. So I really believe that this time has allowed us to disrupt some of the biases in how we engage new talent.
Well, Dorcas, I deeply appreciate you sharing your insight with us today. It has given us an opportunity to think about inclusion in a more holistic manner. And for that, I thank you.
Thank you for your time. And we're all doing this work that's so important.